Okay, let's begin. My name is Laura Smits. I am a former resident of Weston. I was on the Weston League for a good almost 20 years. I now live in Norwalk. I'm also a member of the League of Women Voters of Connecticut and the Voter Service Vice President, which I pretty much got because of my former job as a registrar of Weston. So I thank Weston for that. Welcome all. There are some rules. I don't know Margaret, what annual Speak Up are we on? 29 Speak Ups. It's pretty impressive. It's a good thing. Speak Up is brought to you by the generous donations of Westonites like yourself to our League of Women Voters Education Fund. And I want to mention that this year, 2020, will mark the 100th anniversary in August of the 19th Amendment, giving women, most of them, the right to vote. It's also the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters, and which basically sprang from the organization that got us the 19th Amendment. Those organizations formed the original League of Women Voters. So here for that. I also want to give a special shout out. We have some interesting members in the audience. We have former Selectman Woody Bliss. Hello, Woody. Thank you. Former Selectwoman Gail Weinstein is here too, along with many other important people. You're all important. So before we begin, this is how Speak Up works. There are no personal attacks. Questions, comments should be about a subject being discussed, not the person representing the board or commission. Statements may be made instead of questions. However, the moderator has the right to limit the length of a statement so that others may have a turn. The moderator may also determine when a subject has been exhausted and may ask for a question about a different topic. She may, however, return to the previous topic after others have had a chance. People with questions must stand, use the microphone in the back, state their name and address. A question may be answered by more than one official if deemed necessary by the moderator. The object of Speak Up is to give as many citizens as possible an opportunity to ask questions. The moderator has discretion as to how many questions may be asked by the same person. We ask that participants remain civil at all times and respectful of the officials. And I also want to mention that Speak Up is a local and state event. Please refrain from, let's keep it here. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it about Weston. Let's keep it about the state and try not to get too involved in the national picture, if you would. Appreciate that. Now I'm going to pass the mic, and each one of these people who are sitting on the stage are going to introduce themselves. And I'll begin with you. Stephan?
Stephan Grozinger, Board of Selectmen.
Chris Spaulding, Board of Selectmen.
Samantha Nestor, Board of Selectmen.
And women.
Tony Pesco, Board of Ed.
Bill McCursey, Weston Public Schools.
Steve Ezzies, Board of Finance.
Nancy Thiel, Beautification Committee.
Ken Edgar, Planning and Zoning Commission.
Alan Swerlo, Building Committee.
Will Haskell, State Senator from the 26th District.
John Weingarten, Weston EMS.
State Senator Tony Huang from the 28th District.
Beth Gralnick, Police Commission.
Ed Henion, Police Chief.
Jonathan Luiz, Town Administrator.
Ann Hunt, Library Board.
Amy Califa, Sustainable Weston.
Ann Hughes, State Representative, 135th District.
Mark Cooper, Director of Health, Westport Weston Health District.
And last, Bruce Lorenzen, Commission on Aging.
Okay. Margaret, do you want to start us off with the first question? Yes. And please, if you have a question, get up behind Margaret and get in line.
Margaret Wurtenberg, I usually just also say Wilson Road where I live, but this is your meeting, okay. So my question is for the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I've been asking him the first question now for a couple of years, but I believe he has some news about the new town plan and how we can all participate either in writing or in person. Ken?
Sure, happy to do that, Margaret.
If you would stand up, that would be great.
I would. I'm still capable of doing that. So we have completed a draft of the 10-year plan. You may recall that this is a state-mandated exercise. If you look at Section 8-23 of the Connecticut General Statutes, you would be amazed at how many things we're supposed to comment on. But fundamentally, what we wound up doing is asking 3 questions. What is Weston? What do we want? And how do we get it? And that's the way this is divided up. We don't want to spend all day today talking about planning and zoning, but I would urge you to think about participating in our April 4th public hearing. It'll be 10:30 in the middle school library, and I'm happy to answer specific questions as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay. Open mic. It's open mic Friday, open mic Saturday. Anybody? Don't be shy. That's what this is all about. Come on, people. I know you guys want to ask questions. There we go. Excellent.
Hi.
Sir.
Tim Rogers. Weston's property taxes increased the highest of any city or town in Fairfield County, according to a report from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. Our mill rate jumped from 29.39 to 32.37 for the 2019-20 fiscal year. What are we going to do to bring the mill rate down? We're not competitive. Westport's got a considerably lower mill rate. They've also got the convenience of the railway station, which is a big attraction. How are we going to lower the cost of moving to this town and lowering the property taxes? Does it mean we, God forbid, cut the budget of the school? Is there some way that we can make this town more affordable? Because we're not going to attract millennials to buy property here in the current situation.
Thank you for the question.
So we are critically aware of those concerns, and last year in particular was a bad year for us, primarily because of the revaluation where property values went down 6.75%, which is a huge component in the increase that we had last year. The other huge component was roughly $1 million broken up into 5 years. That was a pushback from the state for our municipal employee retirement system payments. The reval, luckily, is a non-recurring expense, so while that was a fairly intense impact, it will not be carrying forward, although we are at an elevated rate, and we acknowledge that. So what we as a board have been focusing on, and what I've been collaborating with other boards in town, are basically a multi-pronged approach. The first is to find synergies and optimize and look at sharing resources with other towns. We've had partnerships with Wilton. We've had partnerships with Westport. We're looking at a new partnership, or a couple of them, with Easton now, where we can basically share resources. Still maintain control of the quality of the services, but share resources. The other is we've looked extensively at finding money from other sources that would not come on the mill rate. In particular, we've gotten multiple millions of dollars in grants for sidewalks, for upgrades in the library, and for other things like that. That said, we still need to look at more ways to keep the mill rate down, because we understand that we're just not at a sustainable pace. Part of the problem we have is that a huge portion of, and you're going to probably hear the same thing from the schools, is a huge problem we have is that the increases are being driven by staff funding issues, particularly healthcare, and healthcare isn't a problem unique to Weston. We're looking at next year, probably 5.5% increase alone on healthcare, and we've been looking at increased rates. That's actually a low rate. I think the schools got a much larger increase. When that happens, because so much of sort of expense is tied to that, and contractual wage increases, which are tied to the cost of living, which is around 2.5% also, you've got a built-in increase there. So anything we're coming in below that or close to that means we're cutting other stuff. And we have cut other stuff, and we took a lot of heat actually last year for starting to scale stuff down. So sort of a multi-pronged approach. I wish I had better answers, but we're looking everywhere. And the other thing I'll throw out there is we're open to ideas. So we're looking at everything. People say, well, why don't you look at regionalizing? We're talking to everybody about everything. So, you know, that's the best answer I can give you. We have scaled town operations down to sort of bare bones, but if, you know, the town demands it, we'll go deeper. But at this point, we're running at a fairly slim level. You know, the other portion of that, I think, you know, we are only about 20% of the budget, and I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the Board of Ed to throw in his thoughts on the other 80% of the budget.
Thanks, Chris. Well, you know, I think that first and foremost, you know, everybody believes and still believes, everyone I speak to, that we want to maintain the quality of education that we've always had in Weston. Unfortunately, that's coming with the price. And what's happening is every year, we're basically in this tactical discussion about budget increases, about what we actually, you know, most of it is contractual, most of it is staff. And we're at a point where we're really at a crossroads, at an inflection point where we really need to not treat this in a tactical way, but in a much more strategic way, to kind of figure out exactly what kind of school district we want and how we're going to deliver education over the next 3, 5, 7 years. So, you know, my view as chair of the board is I'd like to push a much more strategic approach to better understand exactly how we want to deliver education in a more strategic way and have a multi-year plan to do that. Because if we don't do that, every year we're going to be in the same, you know, whether it's a 2 or 3 or 4 or 1% increase, we're always going to be having that same discussion. I'd rather step back and have a longer-term plan to figure out exactly how we want to organize our schools. We have to make a decision about the configuration of our campus, and ultimately we have to make a decision about the kind of education we want in Weston and how we're going to govern that. It's not easy, and if we keep on thinking tactically year after year, we're always going to be in the same spot and have that same discussion.
If the state can help, that would be even better.
Well, I do think that the state has a small but important role here, and that's that Chris never hesitates to call when there's some state mandate that's increasing costs for the town. And I think that one important one where we might be able to make some progress in the next year or so is public notice requirements. As you may know, the town is forced to spend thousands of dollars advertising public notices in really costly newspapers, frankly, which don't have a big circulation here in Weston. The Norwalk Hour, the Danbury News Times, these are not publications that are widely read in Weston, and yet taxpayers are forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars every year posting public notices. We know that bringing this law into the 21st century, I see my friend Ted in the back, Weston Today, I believe, is far more widely read. It would be a boost to transparency, and it would also be far more affordable to bring those public notices online. Last year, we worked on this bill. It was defeated at the last minute by the newspaper lobbyists, but we will try again because it is an opportunity to relieve some mandates on the town.
And I'll just throw one last thing about the state, and not too much of a dig, but a couple of years ago, we were getting something like $1.2 million from the state. We're now down to $600,000. You know, that doesn't help. Every $130,000, at least on the town end of the budget, is about a percent increase or not. So $600,000 drop in the last couple of years is certainly not hurting. We hope that there will be no pushbacks coming forward, and we do expect our representatives to fight strongly against any further pension or other cost pushbacks onto our wonderful town.
If I may. Sure, to offer back on the state level, I think it is important for us to listen to the localities. Sometimes the state has a philosophy of thinking that we know better from the Golden Dome and impose our will and ideas on localities. I have always been one that believed that local control, local input is critical. You know what is best in the community, just as evident by today. But I think the second critical thing is there has to be a tremendous sense of urgency. There needs to be a sense of urgency when you see, through revaluation, decline in property value, cost of living continually increasing, the burden of mandates that was mentioned earlier. The public notice is only but one. There are so many other mandates, and we in government at the state level continue to increase our appetite for spending and impose our will on local municipalities. So I think if there's nothing else I can leave is to have a sense of urgency that a discipline and a context need to be put in place that we can no longer tax and spend because the will of the people are making that decision by walking out of our communities and out of our state.
Thank you. Superintendent.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of underscore Tony's point, because if anyone's been paying attention in the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, that urgency is upon the district. I mean, the leadership of the board has been very, very strong on this. We brought forward, the administration did in unanimity, the amount needed to keep the district going, and immediately said it's way too big a number. You may have heard it was 5.5. The 4.89 in that was exactly what was needed to maintain what we have. The administration said we now are at a point in Weston, given, since I've been here, by the way, we've cut about $2.5 million out of the budget. We said the places we'd have to go to reduce, that has to be a discussion with the board. The administration can't, on its own, bring forward that, because we are at that pivotal point. So we brought that forward. You now have before you, at least the board voted on a 2.89 growth number. That's the lowest in 3 years they brought forward. It's included about $1.5 million in reductions. And the board did, rightly so, say, let's see what a zero would look like. That was an additional $1.5 million. And in Weston, the administration here, the staff, all that work had never had to consider a potential zero. So there were a lot of feelings in the district about that. We've managed that. We now are at 2.89. We've endorsed the board's leadership on this. That number, 2.89 growth, is now before the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. But that urgency is upon us. We've been acting that way. And Weston, you are not alone in this. I sit every month intensively with fellow superintendents. I was with them yesterday. This is a question and issue there. But let me say one thing. There's a narrative a bit out there in Weston that our performance is slipping. We just learned this week that on the state report card, like that report card or not, it's based on 22 indicators, you have the top performing high school in the state. And that's been a 5-year upward growth. Top performing in the state. Competitive high schools are 5, 6, 8, 7 points on that scale below. That's a big gap. Your elementary schools are way above the state average. The middle school is at the state average. We're not happy about that. We're going to be zeroing in on that. For 4 years, they've been at the state average, but that total index number overall puts this district still right in the mix with all the top districts, and then the high school is setting the pace statewide. Another indicator, the new Canaan Super said to me yesterday, Bill, you need to celebrate that in Weston. On the next generation sign standards, a different indicator. We lapped everybody but in one of the 8 areas. And he said to me, and if you know New Canaan, they are at the top of all the performance lists. And Brian said to me, Bill, make sure your town knows that even through all this budgetary struggle, you still are the beacon for what everyone else looks at for performance. So I just want to make sure we understand where we are, because we're still excellent, and we're striving, as Tony said, through strategic work to maintain the excellence, but yes, indeed, cutting back.
Okay, thank you. I think Selectman Grozinger wants to. Wait. Oh. Okay.
Thanks. Ooh, that was close.
All right. Usually they don't.
I've been up here on this stage at least 6 times in various capacities. I've never had the mic, so I'm going to fight for it. I just wanted to offer maybe a little, in addition to what Bill was saying, a little hope. It's not all bad news. There are things that we are advertising about Weston's story that I think are very compelling and may well make the difference in deciding to move here or not. First is that if you so much as step over the line between Westport and Weston, your house cost of buying a house here is less by almost 6 figures. Additionally, if you bring your child here to Weston and start them in the kindergarten, they will meet the same students, the same 180 or plus or minus students that they will go through school with through 12th grade together. There's no feeder schools or anything else. They will have the same cohort, the same friends for the entire period, which from my perspective, that had a lot to do with why I moved to Weston 20 years ago, and I think is a compelling case. So I know Sam has taken the lead on advertising Weston's story in our website and with brokers and things like that. But I think if we get that story out there, it will help.
Okay, let's give it back to Chairman Ezzy's.
And
Really?
number one safest town in Connecticut too this week.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I just want to put that question in perspective because we're always compared to Westport. We're not Westport. We don't, if you look at the mill rate of towns closest to transportation centers with large amounts of commercial space, it's Westport, Darien, New Canaan, they all basically have the same mill rate. The further you move away from a transportation center, the greater your mill rate. So Wilton, which does have a lot of commercial space, is and does have a rail line, but not a convenient rail line. Their mill rate is approaching 30. And so you should know, I mean, it's nice to say we can save some money and not advertise in the Norwalk Hour, but that's really not going to save us very much money. But what you should know, the conversation that Tony alluded to, we're having my counterpart in Wilton and I get together, as most recently as last weekend, to talk about what our two towns can do to do together. Same thing as Chris is doing with his counterpart. Because we have to make substantive changes, because we're not going to be Westport. We can't be Westport. We just don't have the same economic makeup of Westport between residential and commercial. But we are much closer to Wilton or Easton or Reading, and those conversations are ongoing. And it's not an easy answer, and it's something that we need to plan for, because I don't know what's going to happen at the state level, but if there's a repeat of what the previous administration wanted to do with teacher pensions, we have to know what we're going to do as the state may or may not push down further cost on the towns away from the state. And I can guarantee you that those conversations, Chris and I had those conversations, and Jonathan as most recently as last week.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on. I think there was another question in the back. It's safe to stand up again. Thank you for waiting.
I felt like I was standing forever. Gail Weinstein, Hills End Lane. First of all, I do want to thank Board of Education Chair, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance for doing everything they can to keep the budgets low. I know that you guys are working really hard, and I just want to say I completely appreciate what you're doing. But there are two reasons why those budgets, even if they are low, are not translating into low mill rates. And that's because you are getting $1.2 million less in education aid, as well as $250,000 less in town aid to road. So when people complain about why aren't the roads, in such great condition, it's really hard to do a lot more when you're getting so much less. And the second reason is really groundless growth. When I was first selectman, and even more when Woody was first selectman before the Great Recession, we enjoyed groundless growth in the 3 to 4% range. When Woody was first selectman, and even after the Great Recession, we were still getting groundless growth of 1%, 2%. Sounded menial at the time, but right now I would really take that, because that really helps to offset those budgets so that we can keep the mill rates low. So I want you to understand that piece of the equation as well. I do think that there's a lot that can be done on the state level to help both of those things. One is to try to claw back some of that state education aid. As Steve pointed out, we are not like a lot of the surrounding communities in Fairfield County, and yet that is our cohort. Weston, Easton, Reading, all of the more rural communities don't have those big commercial centers to help support and offset any sort of increases. So all of that falls on the taxpayers. So we have to look at that formula, particularly now that we have a mill rate over 30, to try to claw back some of the money. The second thing is I do think that there's plenty of things we can do at the state level to kind of get our groundless growth up and make Weston a more attractive town, as well as Easton, Reading, and the surrounding communities. 30% of our people work from home. I don't know what happened with broadband that we were working on 5 years ago, but that seemed to fall by the wayside. Senator Haskell mentioned mandates. I know that when I was first selectman, I was working with former superintendent, and we identified 78 unfunded mandates. And I don't think any one of them has made any change or shift in those 5 years. So I guess this question is for our state legislators in terms of what you think we could be doing to get back some of that money to offset our ever-increasing mill rates, as well as what we can do to make our towns more competitive.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for that question, State Representative Ann Hughes. I have met with some of the superintendents and look very much forward to figuring out a way if the school districts are saving costs and efficiencies on their costs of transportation for special needs students, outplacement, how we can get access to the special education funding sooner. To be an incentive to make it cost efficiencies. How can we, with this debt diet, reward towns like Weston and Easton and Reading and surrounding towns that are demonstrating cost efficiencies? How can we get incentivized by getting a bigger access to those state grants when we show that we have demonstrated cost efficiencies, good stewardship, and good efficiencies. And the governor is very open to that. He is mandating a debt diet, but that debt diet seems to be a little bit flexible in terms of rewarding towns and districts that have unique challenges like ours.
Such a great question, Gail. Thank you. My answer is not going to be particularly, I think, exciting or inspiring, but the most important thing that we need to do jointly, Republicans and Democrats who represent this area, is fight the teacher pension pushdown. I think that our first selectman was spot on in pointing that out. This would represent a huge cost passed down from the state to the towns. It would result in an increase in property taxes, and frankly, it's not fair because these promises were made by the state. They should be honored by the state. Mandate relief is crucial. I would love to take a look at that list. Of course, Steve, the public notice isn't going to solve everything, but I can't tell you how much easier our jobs are, how much more effective we can be through specificity. It's easy to stand up and say, I want mandate relief, but it's so helpful when people on this stage give me a call or give Ann a call or give Tony a call and point to specific areas where the state has imposed a mandate that is costing taxpayers. I would love to work on many of those unfunded mandates, as well as continue to oppose that teacher pension pushdown.
I would go back to the key word of urgency. I remember 2 years ago when the governor, then Governor Malloy, handed down a draconian budget that literally hurt so many of our communities. And the legislature, on a bipartisan basis, stood up and said no. And we recreated the education formula because we stood up because there was a sense of urgency. Unfortunately, what I saw in the last year was back to business as usual. There was no discussion of mandate relief. There was no more discussion of being able to give local input in regards to budgetary pressures. We went back to looking for revenue, pushing down pension liabilities to our towns, regionalization. Again, we don't have that urgency. I can't stress that enough, because when you sense that, when individuals who can't sell their home and see their property value fall 20%, when they see their mill rates increase, they feel it in their pocketbooks and in their emotions. But unfortunately, Hartford doesn't hear it. We continue to think it's business as usual. So I think unless people make that a powerful message that you can no longer to do business as usual, that you need to make the necessary cuts and look at those 70+ mandate relief. It may not be for every town, but it goes back to my fundamental. I believe my local municipalities and the leadership sitting in front of you know far, far better than what the state tells us what to do.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to move on. People are getting up to the mic.
One last thing I want to implore them, just to get while they're here.
Quickly, sir.
Very quickly.
Very quickly.
We are in the state municipal employee retirement plan. Please, all of you, lobby to have new employees go into a defined contribution instead of a defined benefits plans. Yeah. It's going to be better for the employee. It's going to be better from the town. Please fight for that.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm David Weber. I live on Samuelson Road. My question is about the proposal to create a village district around the center of town. Is there any update on that? Where are we with that proposal?
I think that's for planning and zoning.
That would be me. So, first of all, the updated 10-year plan is on the town website, which contains a complete description of the village district, which I won't go into in great depth right now. But essentially, the village district accomplishes two things. One, it expands our commercial area in response to our town survey, in which 71% of our town wants more amenities, more sidewalks, et cetera. And the second is the village district allows us to control the nature of that development. So it's not some hodgepodge. It's something that we, through architectural input, can control. So that's the basic story on the village district.
How do we implement it?
Right now, we'd have to change our zoning. Basically, the way this works is we issue the 10-year plan, and then we consider specific zoning changes to implement the village district. And that will be a separate process, which will require a separate public hearing, and will be down the road.
When is that public hearing scheduled?
Public hearing for the POCD, one thing at a time. April 4th, 10:30 is our POCD. That's the 10-year, that's an acronym for the 10-year plan. When we get to the zoning proposal, which we will have to draft and propose and will be distributed publicly, then we'll be able to schedule, I know you're in a hurry, but we'll be able to schedule a subsequent public hearing on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, please.
Good morning. Jesse Pasquale, Pheasant Hill Road. My question is directed to the Board of Ed and the superintendent regarding the survey we filled out in relation to later start times for mainly the age group that attends the high school, all the research that has come out to that end, and some of the other towns that have successfully implemented later start times. So maybe you could give us an update on that and your opinion. Thank you.
Sure. Tony asked me to address this topic. Actually, very few districts have made this change, but we will be bringing a recommendation to the board. There's a task force that's been working with me this year, highly efficient, very effective, broad-based task force, including community representation, all the staffing units, if you will, administrators, et cetera. They're going to bring forward a recommendation at the February meeting. It was to be January, but he said, let's get it out of the budget process to February. The recommendation is going to include, one, stay the same, because that's important for the staff to hear that, because by survey, 60 to 70% of them want to stay the same, but the other two will be changes. One would be a shift to roughly an 8 o'clock start for the high school, do the math on the rest, we're at 7:45 now. The other would be to 8:15. The sense of the task force is the shift to 8:30 requires so much after-school adjustment, both on the town side for all of the activities, as well as the school, that it's quite a big shift. You may know that, Weston, you were one of the pioneers on this about 10, 12 years ago. Wilton went further at that point, but Weston was right there. So this would be, in a sense, building on that. We'll put those three options to the board. We're drafting that report now. The task force is going to see it next week. It's a blend of the survey results with all the other input. Now, in terms of other districts, many may know Greenwich made this change. They went from 7:30 to 8:30. I happened to be superintendent when that happened. That was a key part of some of my work there. New Canaan right now, within their budget process, is looking at this change. We'll see how it works. Their budget's before the Board of Finance now. Brian told me yesterday this will be a topic, whether it can persist. I learned yesterday that Westport is shifting to a potentially 8 o'clock start. Norwalk, you may know, voted to go to an 8:30 start. Again, it's high schools, and you do the adjustments relative to the younger children. So the survey data, which was not a vote, but was indicative, said yes, would like a change, but the dramatic to 8:30 may be very, very complicated. And parents were sort of comme ci, comme ça, staff was opposed, students were supportive. But again, that's one piece of data. And every town that's done this has said, survey is a piece of it, but it's not a vote. You need to bring all the variables together. But if I've been clear, the board, and I've already sort of laid it out here, hint, you're going to get a recommendation to grapple with several options, which will take a little more digging. In terms of budget impact, in terms of adjustments in administration, all the rest, that's something to think about. Final comment, Ridgefield was about to make the change, but had turnover, leadership change, and multiple seats at the central office and said, we may need to hold off on this because it's a very complicated change. And right now, it's a budget neutral change for Weston. other than we have to figure out some after-school athlete busing issues. Other than that, it's a cost-neutral approach. 1.2 million per year ad in Greenwich, about nearly $1 million ad per year in Norwalk, a $900,000 projected ad in New Canaan. So if we can keep this budget neutral and get closer to the sleep patterns, it's a win. But we'll see what the board thinks.
Okay, thank you. I think Selectman Nestor wanted to put in on that one.
No, I didn't have an answer. I had another question for Dr. McCursey.
Wait,
Sorry.
no, you have to get up to the mic.
So,
Wrong mic.
is that allowed?
That's okay. Go ahead.
No,
We'll-
it's just
we'll
related
get
to
you.
that.
Okay, quickly.
Just, I know that there was some conversation about once upon a time about flipping the times, the younger kids going earlier and the older kids going later. So I just wanted to address that.
Very friendly, helpful question. Those of you, some of this may be, what are they talking about? It's very big research that's irrefutable in terms of the medical issues of sleep patterns for adolescents. You're really thinking middle school and high school. And the start times we've had across the nation, and many of you had growing up, just too early relative to the sleep patterns. So there's been a movement across the nation driven by medical research to get the start times later. Frankly, how that applies in real structural change is a challenge. That's why out of the 16,000 districts in the nation, really only a handful have done this. Only 3 or 4 in this tri-state area have made the change, but it's the right change to try and make. One of the options that's looked at is, and this is my sort of soft talk on the younger children, is you flip it. So you make the younger children go dramatically earlier instead of the high schoolers. Our survey, the task force is saying, please don't do that. In Weston, we are locked in. We've done a lot of analysis of this. We need about a 45-minute bus turnaround time. So you have 2 routes. If we go to more routes, it's $70,000 per bus, and you can run the numbers. That's what's driving those other town costs. They have to add buses to make it work. The flip here would mean we might have young children waiting for buses at 6:45, 6:50 in the morning. That is just not a wise move. So we have an approach that the elementary principals are endorsing that would be, that's why the 8:15 is really something we're looking at with some hope, because it's a little later start for the elementaries, but not so late. We're trying to get to that sweet spot with, the flip would just, there's no support for it amongst your professionals because of the impact on young children. But I hope.
Thank you, Bill. My follow-up is, do you anticipate anything changing for the next school year? And do you feel in general it worked in Greenwich?
Wow. That's a technical response. We still are planning with the February recommendation of the board that they could vote by April on the change if they feel that that's right. We're going to have to do another survey. We think again, it's not a vote, but a very focused survey. If the board says those options feel right, we'll come back with a really targeted survey to get a little more data on those two. We've been doing focus groups. The parent leadership on this has been phenomenal. The staff leadership, though they're resistant, has been phenomenal. They say, yeah, we're going to grapple with this, because they do see the momentum out there. Remember all those schools I just listed that are suddenly looking at this. We think it could happen by the fall. It's quick turnaround, but if we're cost neutral and you don't have a lot of administrator change, because believe it or not, administrators are pretty key to this one, we think it could happen. But that's going to be a discussion for the board. We think an April decision leaves us enough time to do that. Greenwich, I live there still. Now it's settling out, but one of the most complicated changes in that town in the last 4 or 5 years. For laughter, I'll tell you a story. We rent. A plumber comes into the house to work on our house. He turns to me and says, my mom used to work in the schools, and Bill, she actually used to like you. You know, I'm sorry you went to Weston. We liked you, but right now, Bill, you've ruined my business because I can't get anywhere in the morning to get to my jobs. Now, Greenwich is not Weston, but we've worked with Chief Henion and Captain Burdacki to study traffic patterns. And we have to think about the intersection right over here. We have to think very carefully about that. And that's also why we can't narrow the bus drop-off and the car drop-off, because it just getting on and off a campus would be a real challenge. So I think at the end of the day, the teachers in Greenwich say early, they're better, we like it, they're attentive, but at the end of the day has been a challenge. But more districts are swinging, so that tells you the answer. Get through the struggle, get through the transition, pain and complaint, which is town and gown on this one, and over several years you'll get to a reasonable place.
Okay, I think we're going to move on
Thank you.
to another question. Tony, can we just, because I want to get as many people up as possible, and a few people have been waiting a while. Is that okay? You might get a second shot at that later. Thank you, sir.
My name is Martin Tuberty, Glenwood Road. This is on a lighter subject and has to deal with traffic light and precisely the one at this intersection over here. I go there many times a week, and it is constantly the same situation that you're liable to face, and that is in the right-hand lane, someone decides to go straight across, and there is a turn only. In the left lane, it is going straight or a left turn. It is so unique. I don't know of anywhere else in the state that has that particular kind of an intersection where it's a right turn is only. It seems like it should be going straight. There seems to be a very simple problem that has never been done, and it's one of two things. Either a sign on the light, on the lines that go ahead, once again indicating that. I know that there are two signs out there right now, but many times they're of no avail. But probably more effective would be a right turn light only. And then on the left lane, just have the regular and then a left turn sign. It seems to be an easy solution. And so many times I think we have too many cars from other areas that are just not familiar with that and just proceed straight across. And it's not all the time, but it's always a potentiality for an accident. And I'm very much aware of it. So.
Okay, thank you. I'll let
And
Chief.
we're talking about going up Northfield to the corner?
Right here.
Right here. So I will turn it over to the traffic authority.
Chief.
I have observed that, the same phenomenon you have seen at that light. Unfortunately for the town of Weston, is a state intersection, so it's governed by the State Traffic Authority. We, as the Board of Police Commissioners, has only advisory role in the state intersections there. You pointed out it is marked. There are two signs. One of them was taken down in an accident recently. I had it put back up. The state came out and took a look at it. We enforce what we can there. We don't have a large number of accidents there. I'm sure there's a bunch of close calls there, and traffic, as you know, queues up at certain times of the day. And I know in the new plan, the sidewalk plan, there is a component to realign those intersections, especially at School Road and Route 57. And I believe it also has a component, for Selectman can talk better than I, about the possibility of a realignment at Northfield and 57. So.
Well, there is a significant realignment at School Road. We are looking at going northward 120, 150-foot right turn only lane, which will alleviate a lot of the northbound traffic, especially during those school times that we were talking about, drop off and pick up. Southbound, there will be a dedicated left turn lane. So as you're coming south towards school, there will be a lane that you shift off into that you can, if you're going to turn left into school, and otherwise you can keep going straight. In terms of the actual intersection, we're not going to do any signaling changes or lane changes going in that direction. This was part of a sidewalk plan, and there were recommendations from an organization that was called SWERPA, which is now part of basically WestCog. But it was a traffic study the state did and recommended to us. But what I will say is that's an interesting point that I actually have not put a lot of thought into, unfortunately. And while we are working with the DOT, the Connecticut Department of Transportation, on these current realignments, I will bring that up to them and ask if they have any recommendations, or if they get someone down here while they're down here looking at the changes we're making up the street at that intersection, see if they want to make any recommendations of signage or signaling or road striping. So we will look into that further.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Good morning. My name is Mary Welsh Lehman, River Road. I would like to ask a question of our state representatives. In particular, what specific steps are you all taking to bring more industry and businesses to our state and specifically Fairfield County? Thank you.
Sure. It is about jobs and businesses. I think one of the things for us to do is to create a talent pool to meet the business needs. So one of the things that I'm very proud of is to have been chosen on the Governor's Workforce Council, which has 24 members and encompasses companies like Stanley Black & Decker, Electric Boat, Infosys, Bigelow Tea, as well as universities like Yale and Quinnipiac, but also workforce development initiatives. And the idea is to be able to formulate ideas to cut across silos. Cut across Department of Labor, Economic Development, the Energy Department, to create ideas to kind of energize. The second potential issue is to create new sectors of business. We've been a state that is concentrated on military manufacturing, insurance, financial services, but I think two potential sectors that could be very powerful. One is the Bioscience Initiative. The incubation centers of Farmington and New Haven have exploded in regards to need for the 22nd century. I think the second interest is we have great talent pools in regards to digital technology and cybersecurity. One of the things that we did collaboratively with Senator Haskell is in higher education. We remove program review obstacles for our private colleges to allow them to quickly adapt entrepreneurial and programs that fit the needs of the businesses that are looking for talent pools. Rather than going through a long 6 to 9 month review cycle, we have now created that universities, technical schools can develop programs to meet the needs quickly. So I think it's the positive of it. But as much as we try to do to help our businesses and create talent pool, I always take the philosophy, state policies take 1 step forward and 3 steps back. We talk about big businesses in regards to some of the policies, but 75% of Connecticut businesses, the engine of our businesses, are small, mid-sized businesses. And we will talk about the effects of raising the minimum wage and family medical leave. I will share with you, both of those issues are absolutely essential for quality of life in this area and in Connecticut. But the problem was how it went about it. It did not incorporate shareholders to be impacted, not only small businesses, but our nonprofits and minimum wage. We looked at paid family medical leave. I believe Democrats and Republicans supported it. But unfortunately, the application, the execution of this, I thought was significantly flawed. In the states of California and New York, they implemented it using a private insurer to implement the program. That was one that we advocated for, at least the Senate Republicans did. But unfortunately, the governor and the majority made the decision that we were going to create another bureaucracy, another commission with an additional $20 million to administer this plan. And the state of Connecticut and taxpayers will ultimately be liable from an insurance pool perspective on that. So again, great ideas. Execution is problematic.
Okay, can we, Senator Haskell?
Sure. I don't think we could relitigate paid family leave if you'd like. New York and California both have a system where employees have to contribute to the leave that employers have to contribute to the leave of their employees. We decided that we did not want to impose that additional cost on businesses. But getting back to the heart of your question, and I think it's such a crucial one, how are we drawing businesses back to Connecticut? Every week I visit a few businesses in my district, and whether it's a 2-person bakery or whether it's a 300-person advanced manufacturing firm, they all tell me some combination of 3 things. One, there's too much red tape and too many taxes in Connecticut. We can take some small steps to alleviate that. One, we eliminated the business entity tax. It was a pesky $250 fee that we charged entrepreneurs, and it didn't raise much money, but more importantly, it sent exactly the wrong signal to potential small businesses and entrepreneurs in Connecticut. We also wanted to provide in this most recent budget some feeling of fiscal stability, some feeling among business owners that it wasn't going to get worse in Connecticut. So we fought against increases in the income tax, we fought against capital gains tax, and we paid down the future pensions of our current retirees at the 100% level. So we're making sure we stopped the bleeding when it comes to state pensions, and we made sure that the next generation does not inherit the tremendous debt that we inherited. But the other thing they tell me, aside from state taxes and red tape, they tell me that they can't find a skilled talented, tech-savvy workforce in Connecticut. Those were the words actually used by GE's CEO when they picked up and left. And it's weird because, as Dr. McCarthy said, we've got some of the best high schools in the state. We've got some of the best institutions of higher education in the state, from Yale to UConn to Norwalk Community College, Wesleyan. There's just a million great students who earn their degree in Connecticut every year, but the vast majority decide to pick up and start their careers elsewhere. I think the best way we can address that is start to look at the student loan crisis. Connecticut has the highest student loan debt per capita in the entire country. That makes it harder for young people to buy their first home, to start a small business, to start their family, to buy their first car here in Connecticut. Now, I don't know if you watched the Democratic debate last night. I did. There's a lot of really expensive ideas being proposed, like forgiving all student loan debt, and God knows we can't afford to do that in Connecticut. But what we can afford to do, what we did last year, was forge a partnership between the public sector and the private sector. We said to businesses, if you hire a recent graduate and you help to pay off their student loans, we will reduce your corporate tax rate. One side of the aisle loved it because it cut taxes for businesses. One side of the aisle loved it because it started to address the student loan crisis. And we worked together in a bipartisan way to simultaneously give a tax break, but also make it more affordable for young people to live and stay here. The final thing that businesses tell me is, look, I'm interested in Connecticut. I love living in Connecticut. My kids love the schools, but I can't get to and from work every day. An HR professional actually pulled me aside. She's the hiring manager at her firm a few months ago. She said whenever she gives a job offer to somebody, she sits down and before she lets them accept, they map out how long it's going to take to get to work every day. And if they think it's going to take 15 minutes, it usually takes 45 minutes because they don't realize the time of day. And we know that our transportation system is stuck in the 20th century. On my desk in the Senate, I keep a 1972 Metro North timetable. It shows that the trains have gotten slower since then, not faster. We're moving in the wrong direction by every metric. We have 332 structurally deficient bridges. We have some of the worst bottlenecks in the entire country. I think the best thing we can do for the business community here in Connecticut is finally invest in our transportation system. That means public transit, but it also means fixing the potholes. And there's no Republican way to fix a pothole. There's no Democratic way to fix a pothole. We just need to make sure that we bring our transportation network into the 21st century.
Thank you. Representative Hughes?
Thanks. To just build on all of these initiatives, the governor has redirected the investment in the business community into businesses, small businesses that are, and mid-sized businesses that are already here, instead of trying to throw big corporate subsidies out at big out-of-state businesses. We want to grow the businesses that we already have, the entrepreneurs that are already here, make it easier for them, and to provide them with a talented, skilled workforce. Advanced manufacturing can't fill their jobs. We need to have a better on-ramp for students to consider good, high-paying jobs to fill the advanced manufacturing growing sector that we have right here in Connecticut. We can be a destination for technology and health innovation, research and development. The biggest employer in the state is actually Yale New Haven Health Systems. Let's build on our strengths, and yes, let's fix the transportation problem and invest in mobility as a service, as a user-friendly service for everybody to get where they need to go. And businesses will see that impact immediately.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi, Carol Baldwin from Fanton Hill Road. I am shockingly not going to ask anything about Leshat Town Farm. But
despite your T-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. Still a little promo here. I would love to hear some more specifics about the sidewalk plan, where it's going to go, when it's going to go in, and how the crossing over Weston Road between the schools and the shopping center is going to be made safe, because that's a pretty busy road. Thank you.
Okay, so I can talk about a lot of that. That last part, I don't have great news yet. So we have actually applied for 3 separate grants, 2 of which are pretty much funded. A third is contingent on some stuff that happens federally. The first grant's around $450,000, the next is about $1.4 million, and the third is another $2.5 million. So we got about $4.5 million in total potential grants for sidewalks that are going to be phased in 3 different phases. The first one we've already begun working on. Last Thursday, the Selectman actually voted to sign the contract on that. So those sidewalks are part of what's called a Community Connectivity Grant, and they are going to wrap around sort of the whole inside of this general campus. They're going to connect the schools to the senior center, to the town complex, to St. Francis Church, to the library town hall complex. The exact route is yet to be determined because we are now working with the designers, but you can imagine all those places are going to be tied in together. The next phase of the sidewalks are going to reach up to Norfield Church, to wrap around the north side of town, up around Revson Park, and up Lord's Highway a little bit to the corner of Old Hyde. The third phase, should we get that, will connect Old Hyde at Lord's Highway all the way up to Norfield, wrap up Norfield, and create a contiguous 5-kilometer loop where basically you can walk and never walk a 5-mile loop without actually ever stepping on the road. That's dope. There will also be a very, very detailed fix in terms of that transportation bottleneck we have right at School Road. As I described earlier, there will be a northward right turn dedicated lane, a southward left turn lane, and a pass-through lane, as well as some new signaling. That said, what we're still working on is the exact mechanism for crossing that road. And we know that it doesn't make sense to send the kids down to the corner of Norfield, cross, and expect them to come back up. But where it is right now is not particularly safe because they're basically crossing from nothing to nothing through a bunch of woods. So that sidewalk, that is going to be a key feature, and that's something we are looking at right now. We should in the next month have some preliminary answers. That said, some of this is going to have to also be folded in with the work they're doing on the plan of conservation development, because they envision they're going to have certain expectations what sidewalks look like and where they're going to go. And if the village district does expand, there will be sidewalks running up in there. But it's a very exciting time. It's very complicated. I've got an amazing team of volunteers. And on that note, I forgot at the outset to thank everybody for coming out. And I see a ton of my staff, or the town staff here. And just at this time in budget season, knowing the amount of work you've all done, I just wanted to thank you. And I think the town, should also understand how much work they do. It's unbelievable. What a great staff we have. So what I'll say is, keep your eyes open. I know Margaret has been at the sidewalk committee meetings. Hopefully she'll post some more on it. But in the next month or two, we should have a fairly detailed, really pretty plan to put out there for phase one. So I hope that answers.
Can you give that to the beautification committee, please?
And I also,
Nancy.
can I ask just a quick follow-up?
Sure.
I'm just curious if the townspeople vote on this sidewalk plan, or is it just something done in committees and the selectmen vote on it?
Public hearing at Planning and Zoning Commission and Historic District.
I can't hear.
Jonathan?
Jonathan was saying that there'd be public hearings on these. I believe that the town charter would require a vote. No, for the sidewalks, it's not a town improvement that requires a vote. Anyway, the lawyers will figure that out.
So that's I don't know yet?
I don't personally know that answer.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that part of my job is to make sure that I'm coordinating with Chris and with Jonathan so that there's no conflict between their vision for the town and what we're trying to articulate in our 10-year plan. So you will see, if you go online, you will see the exact location at the current moment of all these sidewalks, et cetera, that's subject to refinement based on the designer that they've hired.
Thank you. Thank you. Wait, where are we going? Okay, thank you, Jonathan.
So I think at a minimum, since it's a significant improvement to town property, the state statutes say that it has to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. We call it the 8-24 referral. Also, the preliminary plans call for a portion of it to be in the Historic District. So that would also have to go to the Historic District Commission for a public hearing and a vote. For those parts of the sidewalk, I don't think, just based on my discussions with the town attorney in the past, we're talking about the school campus, the town campus, those would not have to go to any vote, a special town meeting, or just be approved of by the Board of Selectmen. Certainly, the Board of Ed would be in the loop on that. We have a member of the Board of Ed on the Sidewalk Committee right now. We want to be in lockstep with the Board of Ed and the district in terms of where those sidewalks would go on the campus. In terms of expanding the campus all the way up Northfield Road or Old Hyde or Lord's Highway, if that involves any types of issues concerning people's property rights and rights of way, then yes, it would most likely have to go to a special town meeting.
Okay, next question, sir.
Steve Thomas, Blueberry Hill Road. I've been in town 30-some years and obviously doing a lot of driving around local streets. And on 3 instances on Good Hill Road northbound, I've seen people pull across and go in that cutoff and up the ramp. And I can't imagine what kind of collision there'd be with somebody coming, making a right turn off Steep Hill to merge onto Good Hill from that little cutoff loop. It just scares the hell out of me when I see people do that. But I've seen it 3 times in the 30-some years I've been driving these streets. And I have a second question, which can be addressed. What's going on with Cobb's Mill? It would be a great cultural draw for this town, but it just seems to be stuck somehow.
Okay,
Thank
two
you.
separate questions. First, the road, probably, Chief. Right.
I haven't seen that. You've mentioned 3 times in 30 years. I'm sure it happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I actually just got an email this week on a similar situation at Broad Street and Cavalry Road, where there's a similar physical island there where people just cut to the left instead of going around the island. We could look at that, possibly keep right signs, something like that may help.
Possibly just some larger do not enter maybe would help, because right now you just got one of those arrows that says, bear right.
We can certainly go out and look at it. I can go out with the town DPW director, Mr. Conte. We've done it every year. We take a look at intersections around town that are problematic, that I see trends for accidents or close calls at. We've done some improvements at Fanton Hill and Lyons Plains, Davis Hill up near Valley Forge Road. We've reconfigured some of the stop signs to make it a little safer for some of these things. The roads are, interesting in Weston.
Nice wording.
They're not wide. They were designed when God decided to make Weston, and they're not some of them to modern standards. So we go out, and there's been new signage put around town. When I became the police chief, I noticed some of these, just the signage, speed signs, stop bars were. Some of them were not even there. So we went out, the police department took a survey, worked with the town administrator and the DPW director, and we think we have some better signage up to get people to pay attention to some of the safety issues.
Thank you. The Cobb's Mill question? Everybody's.
So I don't really have a definitive answer for you on Cobb's Mill. But I will say a couple things about it. First of all, Cobb's Mill is a great historic location in town. All of us would like to see Cobb's Mill be successful. The closest we've come to a proposal for Cobb's Mill was a gentleman who came in who wanted to, in conjunction with people from town, wanted to make it more or less of a destination and a catering facility as opposed to a retail restaurant. That proposal, as my understanding, is still on the table. And there are 2 other groups that have come in informally to talk with our staff regarding potential plans for Cobb's Mill. So hopefully, Cobb's Mill is a private facility. It's in the hands of an estate, of Drew Friedman's estate. So we don't have the ability as a town other than to be cooperative and working with them and encouraging them in terms of particularly the buyers to influence what happens with Cobb's Mill. But it is important that at some point in the near future something be done, because Cobb's Mill is deteriorating and it becomes more and more expensive to salvage. So we're going to be as cooperative as we can possibly be at the commission. And I know the town is also very interested in cooperating to make sure that to the extent that we can possibly do so, to save and enhance that facility.
Okay, thank you. Next question, or Chris, are you going to? Okay.
Jump in with
Sure,
a
go
little
ahead.
piece of, because I'm going to, I want this out there publicly. So the town itself, and Jonathan and I have discussed this, is open to figuring out ways to encourage developers, if they want to look at that property, of ways to look at things like what's called tax increment financing, or some way where we can revisit the tax rate if they are committed to investing in that property and bringing it back up to its former glory. So just, I wanted that out there that, we are willing to look at absolutely anything we can do to help incentivize bringing Cobb's Mill back to where it should be.
Thank you.
I omitted one thing, probably worth 30 seconds of discussion. Cobb's Mill, like most of Weston, is actually zoned residential. So the only thing you can do with Cobb's Mill is you can discover what it was used for in the past, which are called non-conforming prior uses, and run Cobb's Mill in the manner that it was run historically. That is an exemption from zoning. So one complexity for any developer will have to be that they can prove that whatever they want to do on that property has been done historically. The alternative is for us to change the zoning regulations and make Cobb's Mill part of a village district or some form of zoning change, which was widely opposed when it was proposed. Stephan can painfully remember this, proposed some, 5 years ago or so. I think attitudes have changed in Weston to some degree, but there is additional complexity to that. Sorry to add to the
Thank you.
length of the discussion.
Thanks very much. Next question.
My name is Woody Bliss. I live on Grace Farm Road. First, I'd like to thank the League for doing this and thank the ladies and gentlemen on the stage for sharing all this information with us. One of the areas that I think needs a relook is the area of consolidation. Frequently, by consolidating functions, you can save money. And I would offer at least 3 suggestions for another look. They've all been looked at the past and not done, but I still think it's appropriate to look at them. First is on a regional basis, looking at dispatch. If they can do it in New York City, why can't we do it in Reading, Wilton, Weston, Easton, et cetera? The second area is right here at home. I've never understood why we have multiple finance departments. We have a finance department in the schools, we have a finance department in town hall. Is there savings by putting those 2 groups together? And the third area to look at is building and grounds maintenance, which again, we have multiple different departments doing that. Can we save money if we put them all into a single department?
Okay, I think we'll start with the first piece, which goes to Chris.
So dispatch is a perennial discussion, and it is an ongoing one. As you know, we just approved a fairly extensive facilities rehab, and we had a small portion for our dispatch center, keeping that particular issue in mind. We are going to do some serious improvements there, but we're not going to do what's needed for 20 to 50 years out, because what's happening is this discussion is everywhere. Right now, Fairfield and Westport, along with potentially New Canaan, are trying this out. They're just getting it started now, but it's not clear whether they even got it off the ground, whether it's going to get off the ground. So we're closely watching that, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And in the event they do it, if it does make sense, we'll talk to all our first responding agencies and look at the financials. And if it works to join in with them and it makes sense for the safety, and the safety is going to be key for the citizens, we'll go ahead and look at that. That said, we don't know if that's getting there. WestCog is doing this large study too of regional public safety that includes dispatch. We asked them, along 4 towns got together and requested that they fund a study, and they funded a excessively expensive study that Chief Henion has been attending for us. But they are looking at things we can share, like common training, maybe a regional shooting range, and also looking at that dispatch question. So that's a question I've talked to all the first selectmen, obviously all the towns around. So it's kind of a wait and see. Part of the problems we have and what we're going to hit is something called the Municipal Employee Relations Act, which says that if you give work from a union, from bargaining unit, to another bargaining unit, that's illegal. That has to be changed by you guys again, and actually I brought that up with the governor himself, and I hope that will continue to be revisited, because every town talks about regionalization, and when it works and we don't lose home rule control and that stuff, it'd be a great thing to do. We structurally cannot do it because we hit that buzzsaw immediately, so we're going to need some help from the state. The other areas internally are things that we've talked about, and I'm going to turn it over to Tony. Jonathan and I have talked with Wilton about some of the ways they're looking at it. We do share some back office already with IT. Sort of the structure of those relationships, and that relationship's kind of key. The places that have worked, it's been a specific kind of structure, and the specific oversight has to be accountable to the taxpayer. There are potential savings there. It is something we're constantly looking at. Groundskeeping, too. We do share some of it, but again, from the town's perspective, we frequently lose control. So we had a 30% increase in our groundskeeping budget for the parts of the field that we were sharing that we kind of had no say about it. And I'm not saying where that came from. I'm just saying it makes it a little bit difficult to budget when we don't have that control. But that said, we are ultimately and always interested in looking at that kind of synergy, because you're right, start at home. If we can make that stuff work, work within unions and within employees, and if we have the right people in place, I think it would be something, because again, I consider the schools in the town one thing, in a partnership. I get blamed for the overall budget. It doesn't matter, if I could try and say, oh, but we're only X percent of the budget, and look at it, doesn't matter. So to me, in the end, it's the taxpayers paying the taxes. So to the degree we can share those functions, I think it's a great thing. We've been talking about a lot of stuff, including looking at this facilities overhaul and other stuff. It is on the agenda and on the radar, and it's something we will be talking about. I assume we could jumpstart those talks too a little faster.
Yeah, I think the three areas that we could potentially look at are technology, finance, and facilities, right? Since I've been on the board, we haven't really taken a really in-depth look at doing that, but it's something that we're going to have to look at. We're just forced to look at, we're going to have to look at. Typically, it really is going to involve a partnership, because at the end of the day, it's not just how you're going to, it's not just the efficiency that you gain from sharing services. It's ultimately the accountability structure as well that has to be figured out, which is as important or even more important than what you're actually sharing, because at some point, if something actually doesn't work, who is ultimately going to be accountable for? So it's complex, but I think that we're going to be forced more and more to look at sharing, I think, in those three areas. And like I said, it's something that I'm going to actually push pretty hard in terms of taking a real hard look at how we could potentially do that. Can't promise that there'll be some real efficiencies out of it, but I think it's something that we're going to have to look at.
Thank you very much. Another question.
Hi, Alyssa Stoltz. I live right here on Northfield Road. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot about is what are things that we can do to be attracting people to the state of Connecticut, attracting people here in Weston. And personally, when people ask me why I moved here about 2.5 years ago, the number one thing I say, in addition to the schools, of course, is the trees. I think that one of the things that Weston has going for it is its fantastically beautiful landscape and attention to nature and the environment. And yet I feel that there's many areas that I have been really shocked that we're not a leader in terms of sustainability. So this is a little bit more commentary than question, but if there's any feedback both at the town and the state level, I know that we have some really great committees going on in town at both the town and the school level, trying to work on some initiatives. There's talk about composting in both the schools and the town, which I think is 100% an amazing option to go for. The plastic bag ban was a great first step, but our neighbors in Westport, with their hundreds of food establishments, managed to pass an ordinance eliminating single-use plastics throughout the entire town. I think that things along those lines are really things that we could be working towards. another sort of personal anecdote, when we first moved to town, we tried to create this beautiful little play area in our wooded wetlands on our property for our children to learn to appreciate nature. And we were reported by a neighbor because we had put wood chips from our property down on our wetlands, which I understand, not wanting to mess with that habitat. But then I was told in the meeting with the Conservation Board that we would have been totally clear to clear cut that entire acre of wooded wetlands. And not only that, but we're able to spray our property with whatever toxic chemicals we could possibly think of, and there's no regulations along those lines. So I think that there's some areas, some sustainability initiatives might cost money, some don't in terms of regulation and really educating and encouraging at the town and the state level on what are the things that we need, both from a moral imperative and also from an attractability standpoint. Another area, electric vehicles, as we're putting in a renovation to the library, we're looking into EMS and town hall. Potentially there's an opportunity for electric vehicle charging stations to, again, make our town feel like a leader and attractive. Electric police cars like they're doing in Weston or in Westport, electric school buses, which I know our sustainability committee is looking into, and there are resources available to support this and make it not as huge of a cost as it sounds like it should be. Waste management, obviously recycling is a disaster now that there's no foreign markets for our recyclables. And so I think anything our town can be doing to really, and the state can be doing to take a look at that on a holistic level, reduce, make smart choices, and make Weston and Connecticut a leader in the area of sustainability.
Okay, so we have a sustainability committee, and Ms. Cavalca, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the question and for bringing up all of those really critical initiatives, Alyssa. I appreciate that. Our committee, and first of all, we welcome people to come to our meetings. They're posted on the town website and give input. We are addressing really every issue that you brought up. First, the trees. So we work with Aspetuck Land Trust, we work with the Pollinator Pathway, and I think education is where that comes in, and it has been brought up to us about clear cutting and things like that. That's really planning and zoning's jurisdiction in terms of any kind of regulation, but our job is really public education. And so there are people that move into town and will clear cut their trees and then find out that there's flooding and it impacts their neighbors as well. It's something that people just may not be aware of the impact. And so we're looking this year to do more public education. We did 3 events last year, and we're really open to suggestions on what people see as a need in terms of educational events. In terms of the bring your own bag ordinance that we passed last year, we sent out a postcard to everybody in town to help raise awareness about recycling, and then we did an educational event last March about recycling as well. And that is an issue that is changing, very, very rapidly in terms of, the greater expense of recycling. And so we're trying to stay involved in that, and also really working with other towns, and maybe even that's an area where we've talked a lot about regionalization today. There's an organization called the HRRA, Housatonic River Recycling. I don't know if it's recycling or Regional
Sounds good.
Association. And there's a potential for Weston to join with them, which would lower the cost of our recycling. But things may change. We may not have single stream recycling. We may have to do more sorting. So as a committee, sustainability is really trying to stay on top of all of these issues and work with the other commissions and groups in town to, to make sure that sustainability doesn't get left off the table when we're talking about budgets and things like that. And we're working with Ken and giving lots of input to the plan of conservation and development. And I urge you to come to the public hearing. We're trying to get everybody's input together in terms of sustainability initiatives that we want to see as part of the village plan and the entire 10-year plan of sustainability and conservation.
Yeah, just to echo briefly what Amy said, the biggest area of comment that we've gotten so far on the 10-year plan has been the area of sustainability. So we've gotten separate comments from the Sustainability Committee, Aspetuck Land Trust, and the Pollinator Pathway, and I've put them all in contact with each other and said, please come to us with a comprehensive list of things that you believe should go in the POCD, and obviously we're going to take all those points seriously and to the degree we can include them in the POCD. But sustainability is a very important aspect of what we're doing in the 10-year plan.
So I can't add a whole lot, but I want to elaborate a few details. And our sustainability committee is fantastic. I mean, it's going gangbusters. And we are open to all new initiatives. We do think that even sustainability is part of Weston's inherent strengths, and we even are branding with it. If you look at our new logo, it's got a little leaf in it. That said, I'm going to pull a couple of things together that have been brought up here. One, the major thing is energy efficiency is critical. Alternative energy is critical. Regionalization, sharing resources, and saving money are critical. So all those things have come up today. We have had a partnership both with the schools and now with the town of Wilton to basically put online 3 megawatts of alternative energy. Now that 3 megawatts in 2 different projects are fields that are built upstate in different parts of the state that we bought into, that we get our energy from for the next 20 to 25 years. Because of those deals, we now have in excess of something like 75% of the town's energy is now alternative or green energy. We can't even add more because of the structure of the credits we have, any more energy. That said, it's nice to have green, but the other kind of green is important too. These deals are potentially saving in excess of $3–4 million over the next 20 years. So it combines a whole lot of different things, and it didn't hurt anybody in town one iota. We are sharing resources. We are partnering with our neighbors. We are partnering with the schools. We're partnering with our environment, and we're saving a whole lot of money doing it all the same way. So charging stations. We are looking at it. We have been looking at it. We would love to have them up everywhere. I found out that we are number 2 in like the state or the country in per capita electric vehicles. I think Westport's number 1. That is and you see it now. You see, everybody sees the Teslas on the road more and more. There's a lot of cars you can't tell are EVs also. I think that is somewhere that Weston can continue to lead. So we as a board have been very concerned and enthusiastic about it. Sustainability is going, and everybody from the schools to the police who we're still talking to about getting hybrid pursuit rated vehicles. Maybe the chief needs a Tesla. That said, very important. We think it's critical, and we are looking into it. I'll let the next person come.
Representative Hughes would like to.
Thank you for leading on this. Weston and the state is amplifying your efforts. We are aiming to pass the pesticide bans this year that didn't get passed last year, both chlorpyrifos and glyphosate bans, and really looking at the PFAS, banning that or providing a safer alternative. We have to protect our drinking water supply for the entire Fairfield County in this district. And so we have to increase our protection so that I will agree with Senator Huang, urgency matters. We are facing a climate crisis. It is the existential issue of our time, I believe, and the state has to lead on that. We are a coastal state. We have only about 8 years to turn this ship around, and the youth are leading on that. We have youth from this town coming out to strike in front of the Capitol, demanding bold change in the face of this. And being carbon neutral by 2050 is not good enough. We have to lead the way. And so we have a number of initiatives, and I'm proud to be among the colleagues that have been named environmental champions by the Conservation League of Voters this year.
Just one more quick thing to add to what you talked about, Alyssa, about the pesticides that your neighbors may be using, and so we've done a lot of education around that. But there's a statute in the state that says, as a town, we're not allowed to create an ordinance that would prohibit using pesticide on your lawn or wherever. And our state legislatures this year hopefully will bring up that issue and overturn the ban, so that then we as a town can decide whether we want to create our own ordinance. We would be in control of that. So it's really a local governance issue.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? We have like 5, sure, go ahead, Don, get up to the mic. Yeah, you kind of do. It's kind of how we whirl here. Well, we can't hear you up here, so if you wouldn't mind standing to the mic. Nope, there we go. Okay. We're flexible.
Wouldn't the elimination, of the state income tax, wouldn't that turn everything around and stop some of the flight from this
We
place
wouldn't have services.
to anywhere else?
That's a pretty broad question, but
But debt can always be structured. You could put debt out for millions of years, but it would make it very attractive to be here.
it sure would. Turn us into Texas or
So
Florida.
I'll take a stab at answering the question. First of all, it's not a crazy proposal. As anyone in the room knows, we didn't have an income tax for a long time. Unfortunately, now 47% of the state's revenue is generated by the income tax. So we would look at cutting 47% of services, and it would be incredibly difficult to do so, whether it's important environmental initiatives, whether it's maintaining some of the best public schools in the state, whether it's investing in our community colleges and in UConn. I personally would there are room for budget cuts, absolutely. In this last session, I sat next to at freshman orientation, which is not just a thing at college, but also a thing in the legislature. I sat next to a brand new state representative named Jane Garibay, who represents a district in northern Connecticut. She doesn't particularly care how fast the trains are to Manhattan, and I'm not passionate about the trains to Springfield, but we're both passionate about eliminating government waste. And she told me about a program in her town hall where if town employees came forward and reported wasteful spending, they would see if their report resulted in cost savings the next year, they got 10 or 15% of those cost savings. I thought it was a great idea. We wrote the bill and scaled it up to the state level. It got bipartisan support. There is room to cut state spending. We want municipal and state employees to be our partners in making sure that every taxpayer dollar is spent efficiently. But there are a lot of people, including in the last campaign, who ran on promises of eliminating the income tax, and I just don't. I think voters in this upcoming election, they deserve honesty, and unless that elected official or that candidate is also proposing 47% cuts in the budget, it's not an honest proposal, unfortunately.
There's no way back. There's no return.
No, you can't eliminate the income tax. But it's an important lesson because 25 years ago, it was to have solved all of our problems in the state. That's the challenge. So for us as legislators present, we have to be very judicious, deliberate, and respectful of the tax dollars before we impose any new fees and taxes. Because once it's in, it never goes away. And I think that's the important lesson. No, we can't cut the income tax. We're far too dependent on it. There are far too many critical services. It's a simple solution. It peels the emotion, but it's not practical. But what we can do is, from this day forward, take a look at every additional fee. We took a great idea of a plastic bag ban. That's in Westport, but we tacked on 10 cents to it. Okay? We looked at increasing fees for dry cleaning. These all build up and cost. I looked at this budget as one of the most regressive because it impacts nickels and dimes people. But the problem is it's never going to go away. So for us moving forward, we all agree that infrastructure and transportation and bridges are critical. But is tolls the solution? Has another revenue source? I hesitate on that. But I think that's the most important thing. No, we're not going to eliminate the income tax. It's here. It's kind of a basis of how we live. We're not going to get rid of the motor vehicle tax, because that was supposed to be a sunset. But I think moving forward, there has to be a tremendous respect for the taxpayer dollars and tremendous respect for people who try to make sure budgets work. I'm going to close with this. We are $96 million in deficit for a budget moving forward to July 30th, 2020. That was from a calculated surplus of over $120 million. We are now $96 million in deficit. Now, what you won't hear going this cycle is the next biannual budget, we are calculated to have potentially $3 billion in deficit. Now, this is after record tax increases and tax increases in the latest budget. we still have an unsustainable budget. That has to stop right now.
Okay, in the fairness of nonpartisanship, Mr. Haskell, would you like to put your 2 cents in on that? Or Ms. Hughes?
Yeah, I'd be
Sorry,
more than
Tony.
happy. I'm going to focus just narrowly on the tolls question because there's a lot to the most recent budget. I supported I wanted to ban plastic bags right away, but some of my colleagues were hesitant. They believe that, unlike Westport, which did it 11 years ago, that there needed to be some public education, some rollout. So they decided a small fee to remind people that for 2 years, that we were going to ban plastic bags was a reasonable compromise, and I voted for it. You know what's funny, though? It was projected to bring in $30 million a year, and it only brought in, I don't know, 11, 12 million, and I saw some folks on the other side of the aisle said, this is an example, not another Democratic tax. Well, it's a wonderful thing that it brought in less money because it means fewer people are using plastic bags. It is working. It is a fee that is working. It is encouraging more environmentally responsible habits. But let me just answer the tolls question because that is the $19 billion question. Nobody wants tolls. I don't think myself or Representative Hughes, we ran for office dying to install toll gantries, but we do want a 21st century infrastructure. We want trains that are faster than they were 50 years ago, and we want roads and bridges that aren't going to collapse. We could raise taxes. That's pretty unpopular in this room and every other room I've ever been in. We could pass on debt to the next generation. That's what Connecticut's done for years, to put more onto the state's credit card. The problem is Connecticut residents then end up paying back every single dollar plus interest. And it's not you, it's your kids and your grandkids. I think that that's tremendously unfair. It's the reason that we had to spend $1.7 billion in our most recent budget paying down pensions. Putting it onto the backs of the next generation is politically expedient, but I think from a policy perspective, exactly the wrong move. So then, when you're new to the state legislature, you ask, questions like, well, what does every other state around us do? And every state between Maine and Florida asks trucks to contribute to the upkeep of their roads. So in Connecticut, we crafted a compromise bill that says, look, not all trucks, not the plumbing truck that's coming to service your home, not the small business delivery truck, but the 18-wheelers, those trucks that have the greatest wear and tear in our infrastructure. One of those trucks, if it's fully loaded at the maximum federal capacity of 80,000 pounds, it does the equivalent damage of 9,600 cars. Now, that truck is paying in every single state that it drives in along the East Coast except Connecticut and Vermont. Why? Why? Because we are the land of steady habits. And I understand that some people think that that's a wonderful slogan to have, but some of those habits are bad ones. And unless we decide to impose a user fee on those trucks that are having a wear and tear on our streets, then it is Connecticut taxpayers that are going to bear the full brunt of funding our infrastructure. I'd rather ask the trucking companies, including 40% of which are out of state, to contribute to that enormous bill.
Okay, thank you. We have one last question, I believe.
Hi, Harvey Bellin, Maple Street, Weston. This is addressed to the people here who are Weston residents. How many of you have a well? Okay. How many of you don't have a well? Okay. Yeah, that's cool. How many of you know things like you shouldn't put Drano in your well? Okay. I'm sorry, your septic system, yeah. But vis-a-vis your septic. Okay, that's good. That's good.
We understood where you were going with that, Harv. Settle down.
Under Connecticut law, towns that have people to depend on wells are not allowed to do additional regulations on pesticides, herbicides, and all that other crap that other people put into their town. There's a bill in the legislature, Ann had mentioned it, that will overturn this law. It's part of state law that municipalities that have wells can't have stricter regulations than municipalities that don't have wells. That's really stupid. So I've got some handouts here. I think it's really important, and I'd love to hear, quickly from Chris and our state elected officials, what we're going to do about that.
So, great point, and I've signed on to a letter being put forth by our Sustainability Committee to have that repealed, and I'd like to encourage our legislators to do that. We do need some control. So I had that same concern. If you look down the side of the road, you go to the state roads, and once or twice a year you see this whole streak of brown, and it's like these weeds are killed out. What's going on? Well, what happens is the DOT uses this diluted form of glyphosate, which we're hearing is now going to be banned, but they still use it and they still say it's safe. However, I have the Department of Public Health come and talk to WestCog and tell us they have concerns about DPH. And I'm like, glyphosate. So the Department of Public Health has concerns about this stuff. We're hearing about a ban. DOT is using it. I say, hey, you guys let each individual homeowner who's on that pathway ask to be exempted from it. Can we do that as a town? Yeah, you can do it, but then you have to pay to manually remove those weeds there. So just think about what it's going to take for us as a small town to basically, and we have a lot of state roads, and that's going from one town to another. We don't have any other say in it, but the one thing they are allowed to give us say on is basically manually cutting down weeds because they don't want to use another option besides glyphosates. The hope is that bill to ban the glyphosates goes through, and that they do repeal a law that says, no, you don't have any right to determine as a town what's going into your water, even though our water, by the way, affects towns downstream. We have the reservoirs that serve Bridgeport and Westport, hundreds of thousands of people. It matters what goes into our wells, and their water courses and their pipelines, and we would like to do what's best for everybody. Unfortunately, at this point at least, the state hasn't cooperated. Hopefully things are going to change. I'm hearing some momentum there. Let's keep our fingers crossed. It is a good point. Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, we're all over that, and like you say, we passed the first state water plan to designate water as a public trust, and that trust we have to now take responsibility for and protecting because you're all science aware that it leaches, and there is significant opposition though from the pesticide industry and some farmers that have all kinds of opposition to banning this very dangerous chemical. So we're going to fight the good fight for you. And your voices matter. Amplify your voices. Like, we will do what the public will demands.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say, in
Go ahead,
terms of sustainability, we have a really great Facebook page. Are you guys all on Facebook? Sustainable Weston. We share information about these initiatives all the time. We do organize and advocate, and we are working with our state legislators, and there's also a real strong grassroots group. So Harvey, please email me and I'll connect you with them. Chris was, I think, one of the first leaders to sign on to this, and now all the other leaders in Fairfield County have signed on to the bill. So thank you, Chris, for making them feel comfortable with that. And hopefully this session will get it done.
Thank you very much. At this time, I believe we are finished. This is great. I just wanted to remind everybody that all of these boards and commissions have meetings, and they need participation. We can't just be online all the time. At some point, we have to build relationship with each other, and coming to a room like this or going to those meetings is how progress is made. And I also ask you to support Weston today. Ted Kraft is here.
Yeah.
He gets as much information as he can. And we thank him for stepping up for that. And thank you. Weston is a great town. The trees, the schools, it's a great town. We need to keep it that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.